The Central Bank of Nigeria and the Nigerian Communications Commission have jointly directed deposit money banks and mobile network operators to settle the long-standing 250 billion naira unstructured supplementary service data debt in a circular dated December 2024, signed by Oladimeji Taiwo, Acting Director of Payments System Management at the CBN, and Chizwa White, Head of Legal and Regulatory Services at NCC. The regulators outlined a structured payment plan to clear the debt. Now, the directive also introduced updated operational guidelines for USSD services. The move aims to resolve the prolonged dispute and streamline the financial and telecommunications sector's collaboration. This morning, to help us understand this better, we're joined by Tajudeen Ibrahim, Director, Research and Strategy, Chapel Hill Denham Securities Limited. Thank you so much, Mr. Tajudeen, for joining us on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
Okay, so this USSD payment issue between banks and telecom operators has lingered for too long, I must say. Why has it been a bone of contention? And who would you say defaulted an arrangement?
I think it has lingered, for so long because there was no clear, statement of, who is responsible for what, and there were also no laid down rules and regulations around, timeline in terms of, when in anything that is incurred by the mobile telecommunication operators. There were no timelines around, when, all of such debt, should be cleared. No doubt, because we're talking about, businesses in this case, there will be payables, there will be receivables. So, but there were no, clear indication around, when those payables or receivables, should last. And also, there were no indication of any penalties by either of the two regulators around, who is defaulting in terms of the laid down agreement by both industries. I think, the new directive, by the NCC and the CBN is going to address all of those, loopholes that previously existed in terms of how the banks and the telecommunication operators were operating the USSD services.
Okay, before we even look at the latest CBN directive on this, how important is the USSD platform itself to Nigeria's financial inclusion efforts, especially in rural areas? Because the telecom operators had threatened to shut down USSD services due to incurring losses at some point.
So obviously the services of USSD in the telecommunications sector and also in the financial sector is very important. Important in the sense that not all Nigerians use, smartphones. So you cannot really find, many smartphones in the rural areas, and that is the area where the USSD services are needed the most. When you look at the rural areas, you will find mostly feature phones, and then USSD services are very important in all of those areas because it is the USSD services that will be utilized, to buy airtime for their phones, to transfer money, to make payment. And payment is very crucial, in this case, when we talk about financial inclusion. So if we want to remain if we want the rural areas to remain financially included in the Nigerian environment and economy, it is important that the issues around USSD be resolved because it is USSD services that are largely speaking utilized in the rural areas. Even when we talk about the urban areas, despite the fact that a large portion of the population has smartphones, you still find some account holders using USSD services even with their smartphones because it is just easy to use, and it is to some extent reliable and also time saving. Instead of you going to the banks, you can still at the comfort of your homes and use USSD services to do banking transactions. These are the areas that make USSD services very important for financial inclusion in Nigeria.
It's even quite interesting that the operators had called for a structured payment plan from the regulators to address the mounting debt before now, but that did not materialize, even with the banks also not bulging. But then if they had done that, wouldn't it have resolved the matter and reduced the debt? Now we are talking about 250 billion naira.
Yes, we're talking about 250 billion naira, but the reality actually is that this is not, a debt that is accrued to only one bank. We are talking about the entire banking industry, and I think that the industry will be able to pay that debt, considering that number one, the two regulators have come up with, laid down rules and regulations and guidelines around, how they can repay the 250 billion naira debt by ensuring that, whatever debt accrued before February 2022, 60% of that, should be cleared before the end of this year, or possibly before January, if I'm not mistaken, according to the communication. So I see this as a concrete way of solving the problem. When we assign figures and timelines, to solving a problem, we will solve such a financial problem. So I think that is the one thing that has to happen very, very quickly. The second thing that is also going to happen is about 40% or the remainder of what accrued after February 2022 also has to be cleared not later than between January and July of 2025. I think attaching timelines and also indicating what percentage of the debt has to be cleared is a step in the right direction, in my view, and will go a long way in ensuring the clearance of all of those debts by the banking industry. I also have read that most of the smaller banks are already complying, and what we have not seen is that we have not seen the tier 1 banks, largely speaking, complying. But I believe they will comply. The reason is because there is a penalty attached by the CBN in that regard. When there are rules and regulations and there are stated penalties, you will be able to solve any form of financial problems in the financial services sector, in my view.
Well, you're talking about penalties being attached, but some people feel that it would bring about additional financial burden on the banks, and that particular ruling is not fair. We're looking at 60%, 40% at some point. Though there is a timeline, we understand, but that 250 billion tag in debt that has to be paid would financially strain those banks. Do you think so?
I think my view is different in that regard, because even the banks do not want to be owned, do not want to be held by customers that will not, pay or, stick to the laid down agreement around the repayment of their debt. So if we are talking about the banking sector, they should, to my mind, be on the front burner in terms of, who is driving, sticking to agreement in terms of repayment of debt. This debt has lasted for too long, and it is negatively impacting on the performance of the telecommunications sector. Do not forget that the mobile telecommunication operators have not been able to respond to the harsh economic conditions because they have not been able to increase their tariffs. If they have not been able to do that, and the banking sector is flourishing by charging higher interest rates in this environment, I believe the banking sector is well positioned to pay this debt, in my view. It is not one bank, I say it again. We have, well over, 16, 20 banks in this case. It should not be a burden to them, I think.
We also see that the CBN, which is the regulator in this case, proposed a shift to an end-user billing model. Now, how would that impact the revenue streams of banks and telcos, and of course the possibility of that straining their relationships too in terms of who gets what?
So if we're talking about end-user billing, because we are looking at, in that case, we are looking at, the customers being billed, because the infrastructure owners are the mobile network operators, and the financial service owner are the banks. And in between the two of them are the customers, who in many cases happen to be the customers of the mobile telecommunication operators and also the customers of the banks at the same time. So if you want to use any of those two platforms as a customer, you just have to pay, because you are the one that wants to carry out the transaction. And that is what, this address. So the customers, have to pay for the service in this case. Nevertheless, I reckon that if you do not use the service for too long, maybe below 10 seconds, there are some opportunities around, favorable pricing for you. So the longer you use the platform, most likely, the higher the possibility of you having to pay as the customers. And I think this is consistent with, the business world, because the mobile telecommunication operators, they also pay for the equipment they put in place. And there are also charges that the banks too have to pay the regulator for carrying out, their businesses. So the customers cannot really, be treated to be enjoying free services. In this case, the customers have to bear the cost.
Well, but how free is this service anyway? Because everything boils down to the kind of transaction that consumers, carry through with these platforms. And now, just as you have confirmed that the burden will be directly placed on the consumers, are you not subjecting the consumers to multiple charges after they pay for VAT, pay for card maintenance, they pay for USSD, pay for everything over a single transaction? Some people are even saying that it should be scrapped.
So let's take a look at it this way. I said it earlier. The question to ask actually is that, is there a cost for the mobile network operators when they render USSD services? The answer is yes. There is a cost, to them. Is there a cost to the banks, when they also render that service? The answer is yes, there is. So we cannot expect the banks or the mobile network operators to be bearing the cost that the customers have to bear. The only thing that they can do is to structure that cost in such a way that it is favorable to the customers. And I reckon that, for that to my transactions that you do. Don't let us forget also that the mobile network operators, for instance, also do some form of freebies for customers based on the volume of calls that you make, based on the packages, that you buy from them in terms of products. So in a similar manner, this, structure can be put in such a way that there is some incentive for customers, that do, large volume of transactions, just to encourage them. But for them not to pay the appropriate price, I think it's not going to happen, in my view.
So even with all these freebies that you mentioned, incentives, you would agree with me that we've noticed notable declines in USSD usage over the course of the years, looking at the financial transactions that have occurred on that particular platform, with a reported drop of about 150% in transactions because of how unfavorable and unattractive it's been in terms of monies that consumers would have to pay when they do these transactions. So if it is not financially and operationally sustainable by the providers of these services, I'm still asking, sir, why don't you think it should be scrapped? I'm not looking at how structured it can be that it will favor the consumers. Hello, Mr. Tajudeen, can you hear me?
So the volume of transactions, can you hear? I can hear you.
Okay, go ahead,
sir.
Can
you hear me too?
Go ahead.
So if I heard you correctly, you have said that the volume of transactions have declined, over the years, for USSD, services. I reckon that it is partly reflective of the fact that it was not favorable up until now to the mobile network operators. We cannot remove the positive impact of USSD, services in the lives of Nigerians, generally speaking. Because if you do not use USSD, what it means is that you are using, banking services via smartphones. And no doubt, the number of smartphones in Nigeria, has risen remarkably in the past 5 to 10 years. That could be the case in my view. And the second thing that I reckon is happening is that we are seeing an increase in migration from the rural area to the urban area, where we have many banks, and some bank customers may choose not to use USSD services. To my mind, it is not necessarily because the cost is high, because even with high cost, you have a lot of benefits around convenience by sitting in your homes and doing banking transactions instead of having to go to the banks to queue to do transactions. You are also able to do transactions of small sizes. And when I say small sizes, I mean you just want to transfer 500 naira to your gate man, want to transfer 200 naira to somebody that just bought something small from. Would you have to go to the banks to go and do that kind of low size or small size transactions? The answer is no. It is not time efficient in my view. So that is where USSD services come in. The only thing to my mind that can happen is for the operators to look at a more favorable pricing. Nevertheless, I reckon that Nigerians are not leaving those services because of high pricing in my view. I think it is more of all of those other factors I have mentioned.
Okay, well, to top off on all these possible charges, now the possibility of even tariff hike becoming more real, according to what we've seen in the media, seems quite very, very true. Now, even some online publications are claiming that, the approval for such increase has been obtained, when we've been able to verify that it has not been. But then let's have your take on the issue around this when we talk about the possibility of people having to pay more for services, tariff hike, so to speak.
I think maybe a good standpoint is to look at what we really have been paying more of in terms of the utilities that we enjoy in this country. Number one, let us take a look at PMS. Nigerians have had to pay more because of the reform in that sector. Number two, let us look at electricity. Nigerians have had to pay more within the past 12 months or thereabouts. Let us also consider the mobile telecommunication services in this case. That is the only service that Nigerians are currently enjoying without an increase in tariff. So and the impact has been negative on the performance of the mobile network operators. It has also reflected negatively on the value of foreign investments that we have been able to attract into the into the telecommunication industry. So all of these factors, make it compelling for Nigerians, to pay more in terms of, tariff on telecommunication services. Bear in mind also that at some point in September of this year, when Starlink realized that the current challenging environment is not sustainable, for its business, it had to implement a 97% increase in its tariff that it charges, its customers. Starlink is a foreign player in the country, and it is also a new player. So it was operating as if this is like a normal response, from a business. But the regulator made it realize that it had to roll back, that price increase because it failed to achieve the approval of the regulator. So Starlink had to suspend that increase. So it is an indication that there is need, for the telecommunication sector to pass a price increase to customers, but the size and the time frame is what have to be addressed by the regulators, and also approval granted by the regulator. So there is no debating around if, it is just a matter of when are we going to see the tariff increase.
Of course. Well, we're talking about 250 billion naira, and we know that the banking industry won't want to be in this position again. So for you, what measures do you think both the telcos and the DNBs can take moving forward now to actually prevent a similar debt crisis in the future?
I think they should be more strategic and nimble in acting around laid down agreement between the two parties, and also between the two regulators, talking about the CBN and the NCC in this case. What I reckon, as I said earlier, is that this is a business environment. No doubt there will be some element of payables. There will be clear, dictation or, stipulation around, when those receivables, will be on the part of the banks. There should be clarity around, when the payables will also, be cleared. If they want to allow for like 30 days, period, it should be agreed upon, and then all of those debts are cleared not later than 30 days, so that they do not accumulate, just like, the current 250 billion naira has accumulated over time. I think it is very important for the two parties, the banks and the mobile telecommunication operators, to be clear around this and also stick, to implementation as agreed by the two of them. I think with that, this problem will not recur again in the future.
I know there's a deadline for January next year and June also next year for the final payment. We hope that both parties will be able to come to the table to have a tea. Tajudeen Ibrahim, Director, Research and Strategy, Chapel Hill Denham Securities Limited. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the show.